Hey everyone, it's your friendly neighborhood critic, here to bring you the review of Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. If you're a fan of Spider-Man, or you just happen to pick up one of the more recent Spider-Man games, you'll know that this generation has been quite disappointing for our webhead. Luckily, this latest game has managed to shock the life back into the wall crawler. With refined gameplay, a more cohesive story, and plenty of great references, this is easily the pinnacle of Spider-Man's gaming ventures.
You should have kept your eyes peeled.
The main concept behind Shattered Dimensions is, well, the dimensions are shattered. You must take control of 4 different, Spider-Men, each inhabiting a unique universe. This system leads to 4 very unique art styles, as well as 4 unique gameplay styles. The Amazing Universe will be the most familiar, as Spider-Man dons the famous red and blue suit. Here the visuals replicate a comic book, and to great effect. The Noir Universe has a dark and dreary tone that matches the early 20th century timeline perfectly. In the 2099 universe, you will find bright, futuristic cities bustling with activity. Finally, the Ultimate Universe has a very extreme, stylized comic book feel. It will be instantly recognizable to anyone who played Ultimate Spider-Man last generation. Combined with good textures, a solid frame rate, and nice animations, the variety in the level design is fantastic and keeps the visuals feeling fresh. Looking great is one thing, but sounding great can make or break a superhero game, as demonstrated by that awful Spider-Man voice from Web of Shadows. Thankfully, the developers have managed to get some of the greatest Spider-Man voices of all time into one game. Neil Patrick Harris, Josh Keaton, Dan Gilvezan, and Christopher Daniel Barnes all lend their vocal talent, and with the help of some witty dialogue, they really breathe life into the game.
It's a condensed matter reactor, the only one in existence.
Is that what it is? Oh.
Also on the audio front, we have some good sound effects and music that, while not incredible, really fits the game. The sound design is not without its problems though. As clever as the dialogue is, it can get rather repetitive after a while. It seems that not very many lines were recorded for each level, and you'll definitely be hearing the same remarks over and over again.
Sleepy time.
Still, it's a small price to pay for having some great voices behind the masks. Unfortunately, the voice work is somewhat wasted on the story. It's certainly not a bad story, but there isn't much to it. Mysterio attempts to steal a tablet, and Spider-Man tries to stop him. In the struggle, the tablet breaks into pieces and scatters across the 4 dimensions. The story takes a backseat to the levels. Each level has its own boss and its own theme. They are all appropriate, but they don't really mesh together until the finale, which is a bit disappointing. Though I guess I should just be glad there's no shotgun-wielding Mary Jane to save. Having 4 different Spider-Men to play as also means 4 different gameplay designs. While the Amazing Spider-Man is basically what you have come to expect from a Spider-Man game, the other 3 universes add much variety to the way you'll play. The most drastically different being the Noir universe. In this universe, Spider-Man is not very strong and he must stick to the shadows to take on enemies. It works much like last year's Batman Arkham Asylum, and while the stealth is not nearly as polished as that game, it's still quite a bit of fun. Taking down groups of enemies never gets old. When we hit 88 miles per hour and land into the future, the gameplay speeds up dramatically. 2099 Spider-Man has the fastest combat and ironically the ability to slow down time. His sections also consist of some free-falling segments that help the game more than they hurt it. Lastly, Ultimate Spider-Man is basically a powerhouse. His gameplay feels similar to the Amazing Universe, only with increased range and the addition of Rage Mode. In Rage Mode, Spider-Man becomes much more powerful, and taking out groups of enemies becomes a breeze. None of the versions of Spider-Man are boring, and each feels different enough to keep you playing through to the end.
You're done.
Those are the differences in the 4 dimensions, but there are also some universal similarities that are shared between them. Take travel for instance. It's been a pattern in the last few Spider-Man games to set the whole thing in New York and make it an open world. Here we find level-based gameplay, which I was initially concerned about. How fun can Spider-Man be if he's not swinging through New York City? Well, luckily it can still be a great deal of fun. The developers have implemented a web zip system that basically lets you zip to almost anything you can see within the level. There are also areas that do allow for some web swinging freedom, and in the end it all works out well. You still get the speedy and agile feeling of being Spider-Man. The developers have also thrown in some gameplay segments like a first-person combat mode with a few of the game's bosses. It's certainly not as cool as it sounds, but it's not terrible either. Some other segments also consist of saving civilians. It may get boring after the first few times, but it only occurs every so often. Besides, everybody gets one.
Yeah, that's great.
Overall, the game is a blast to play. It is of course not perfect, however. Some glitches do show up in the form of checkpoints that don't activate. It only happened to me about 4 or 5 times throughout the whole game, but it's noticeable nonetheless. A simple restart checkpoint thankfully puts things back on track. If you are a fan of Spider-Man looking for a great web-slinger experience, this is it. The game will last you 10 to 12 hours on your first playthrough, and that's not even completing all the challenges or getting all the collectibles. A system called the Web of Destiny has been implemented to ensure you will want to replay the game's 12 levels, and it works. Each level has 15 challenges to do, and they are actually fun and rewarding to complete. Doing so will also gain you points that you can then use to buy upgrades, costumes, and abilities. It lends itself nicely to the level-based gameplay. There is also art, figurines, movies, and character bios as well. Good stuff. You will certainly get your money's worth as a fan, and even if you are just looking for a fun action game, I'd suggest a rental.
I'm Spider-Man, that's what I do. I break pots.
You sure do, Spider-Man. You sure do.